This is the dark side of devotion.
Welcome to episode 2 of the podcast. Yay, we here. We've made it to another episode. So how are you guys doing? How is everything going?
It's going
I
good. It's
mean,
going good.
it's going really good, but to be completely honest, it's like what Anthony was just saying right now, literally right before we started recording. It's like, I think a lot of people may not realize, but this is a heavy topic. And to go back and remember everything, especially after doing so much healing. I mean, healing helps to be able to talk about it, but it doesn't make you like immune to feeling everything again. So, it's tough. These are like heavy subjects for us and for a lot of the viewers as well. But I'm just glad that we have each other and we're garnering community, because I think that's the biggest thing that we need to heal. We need each other. We need to hear each other's stories, each other's experiences, feel like we weren't the only one that felt targeted or attacked in any way. And
Yep.
so as heavy as this is, I'm very happy to be here and very happy to be doing this.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here too. So yeah, I'm glad to that we are talking about it. I think for many years I kind of lived within the guilt of like saying this is just not for me, even though I was born into it. I didn't have a choice to join, right? I didn't get manipulated to join, but I did get manipulated or guilt tripped into staying and to doing most of like going through the motions, right? But before we begin, Stephanie, what do you have to say to our to other people watching us?
Well, if you guys enjoy our podcast, it would mean so much to us if you could subscribe, follow us on our social medias, Instagram and TikTok, The Dark Side of Devotion. We'll make sure to leave it in the description box as well. Not just to support this work, but also to share it amongst friends, family members. Maybe you know someone who is a victim of the system. And I know that I've had a lot of people find me because someone shared one of my videos or one of our lives or something. And it's been such a wonderful journey. So if you think that this is going to be helpful to someone, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Thank you.
Yeah, pretty soon. I think in the next couple of episodes, we're going to introduce an inbox if you want to send kind of your story, if you want to get some, if you're thinking about leaving any type of religious organization or cult or any type of organization that in which you're part of, and you kind of don't know where to start, you can send it to us. We will try to guide you the best way we know how, because we only need to take that one leap, right? We didn't know what was waiting for us out the door. So let's get started with episode 2, right? So episode 1 was mostly kind of giving you kind of the background of how the Universal Church, which is the religious organization that myself, Sarah, Anthony, and Steph were a part of for different parts of our lives, but we became kind of the day-to-day of our lives for many years. For me, it was a little bit over 23 years. I don't know, as Steph or Anthony, how long were you guys in there?
From the age of 14 when I converted until we left, it was 11 years for me. I think for you would have been the same, or a decade, 10 years.
I mean, it's been in my family forever. Like, even though I didn't take it very serious at the age of 10, like it's been a conversation piece in my household since that age. And it kind of influenced everything from that point on. So it's probably at least a good 18 years, like heavily involved in that place.
Yeah, for sure. I think each one of us, we were at different stages, but I think the stage that kind of stayed with me was kind of like between my early teenagers until my adulthood. Was
very
like
formative years.
For sure.
Very formative years. I think
for all of us, right?
Yeah, I think for
Absolutely.
childhood for me was like I was like a little bit in la la land. I didn't really know. I was just know that was like my day to day. But I think I think my adolescence was kind of like the way I was kind of going through that the age of questioning. I didn't what I was told versus what I kind of like coming to grips with, like, this is not okay, right?
If you made it this far, guys, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss any updates or any videos. Also, if you're listening to us on Spotify, make sure you check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at The Dark Side of Devotion. Also, if you have a story that you'd like to share with us. You have an experience similar to what we're talking about. You have questions, you have doubts, or you yourself are thinking about leaving a high demand religious environment, you can reach out to us at thedarksideofdevotion@gmail.com. Let's get back to it.
So I have lots of questions.
Tons of questions, right? Yeah, so let's begin. So I didn't really start in the UCKG, so I didn't come because my parents had issues, or I was going through a midlife crisis. I was literally born in it. So my parents started in the church in the 70s. So my dad was the first one to actually, like, from my dad, like looking from my family, right, perspective, my dad was the first one to come to the church. He was 14 years old, right? You guys see the
connections.
The connections there. And my mom started when she was 15. So the reason why my dad started is my dad came from a pretty much how everyone started, right? His family had some type of problem, right? He came from a broken home. He was the child of a single mom. My grandmother had my dad, I think, when she was about 14 years of age as well. She couldn't really take care of my dad. So my dad actually was raised by his grandparents that moved to Rio de Janeiro. And the family went through a lot of financial struggles. I think that what brought my dad to the church was the financial struggles. My dad, from what my dad tells me about his background, he was pretty much a very smart kid, had a bright future ahead of him, but financially just wasn't there. Like the family was always trying to make ends meet. I think my grandfather, my great grandfather, right, my dad's grandfather, also had tons of health issues as well. There were but it was mostly for financial reasons. Now my mom came from a different reason. My mom actually came from a wealthy family, like a well-off family, where but the issues that my mom had was she had tons of health issues. My mom, she doesn't see from one eye. She's actually like legally blind from one eye, although no one can tell it, but she couldn't see. My grandmother had actually had an accident while she was pregnant with my mom, where caused her to not have an entire vision on one of her eyes. And then she also had other health issues where I believe it was like asthma. And then my mom was starting to become an alcoholic as well, masking her pain through all of those. Although her family was pretty wealthy, they were upper middle class. I wouldn't say they were entirely wealthy, but they were upper middle class. My mom really didn't, wasn't happy, right? And that was part of the reasons why they started, coming to the church. Now, how my parents met, my dad actually started in the church actually when he was 14, and then he was quickly became very my dad says that he went to the church just to follow his aunt to church, and and then his aunt was like, hey, if you're gonna come to because my dad was kind of the jokester. He makes jokes for any type of reason, and he never took anything seriously. So my aunt gave him a warning, you're gonna come, you're gonna sit in the back. If you don't like it, you leave. You're not gonna make a spectacle. And then my dad said that by the end of the service he was right in the front, right? So he was fully committed by then. Then he decided to leave his studies behind and become a pastor. So you go through the auxiliary pastor. So my dad at the age of 14 was already fully integrated into the church, becoming one of his newest pastor, right? And then my dad got sent to a small town called Campos de Goitacazes, which is in Rio de Janeiro, which is my mom's hometown. And that's how he met my mom. My mom was one of my dad's kind of like the churchgoers, right?
One of the members, one of his members.
One of his members.
How old was he when he got sent to that church?
About 15. So my mom and dad are the same age.
So he was already a pastor by 15.
He was already a pastor by 15. Okay. So in that, unlike the church is today, Anthony and Stephanie, church moved very quickly. So he was a single young man, and women all over. So they needed to marry him off.
Yes, I bet.
So that was where my mom came into play. So there was a kind of like a lot of different things that happened, right? So in that time, because he was an auxiliary pastor, there were a lot of girls. So my dad also wasn't allowed to raise an assistant. So in today's church that you see, like in order for you to marry a pastor, right, Stephanie, you have to be an assistant, baptized in the Holy Spirit. You have to jump through all of these hoops to
all the hoops,
your worth for the man of
Yes.
God. And not my mom. My mom was never an assistant. My mom was never any type
What?
of, no, my mom just climbed the ladder to,
Wow.
Yep. They kind of kept their relationship a secret until like they couldn't keep it anymore. But she was never an assistant. My mom was never raised by an assistant or anything like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
That's
they started dating when they were 16. And when they turned 18, they got married. So things moved very quickly during that time, right?
Yeah.
18 years old, got married. And then in that time, the Macedo had kind of like the vision of like, this new pastors, they need to have children. And children is going to be the future of the church. How wrong was he, right? Because here's where I'm sitting.
Exactly.
Total opposite.
And you're not the only one.
Right? I'm not the only one. No, I'm sure I'm not the only one, right? So he kind of so there was like kind of a order that these pastors were to have children. So my era, so the church went through eras, right? So the church was the era of where pastors were having children, and then kind of like shifted to now they go into you're no longer allowed to have children. Now the vasectomy part of it never came. We're going to talk about that because there's a vasectomy era as well, right?
We need to talk about that.
Definitely, we're going to touch on those, right? So therefore they fast forward onto that, and there's the adoption era. So there's also a lot of adopted kids in the midst of the church, right? And these adoptive kids, there's some good and some really bad stories that come out of it as well. Some of the kids were never told that they were adopted. They came to find out only when they were almost adults that they were adopted. Other kids were adopted because they were forced to adopt, not because the parents chose to adopt them. So therefore, there's another thing to unpack there as well. I'm going to discuss those. So and then you have also the biological children. I'm one of the biological children. I'm the youngest of two. So the order was either to have a minimum of 2, right? And you could have as many, but kind of like fast track that became a little bit too costly for Macedo.
I was going to say that's a big resource drainer, right? Because we all know how cheap it is to raise a kid.
Not only that,
nobody ever.
Also, not only that, we had to go to school. Depending on what
a lot of logistics to think about. Like you can't just move a person anywhere if they have kids, you know.
Well, I can say otherwise. My parents said that is not, you're not going to detain me from progressing.
Wow.
So
Sarah,
between birth until I graduated from high school, I was in 17 different schools. That could tell you a lot. There was sometimes where we've moved in 3 different times in 1 year. So I went to 3 different schools. So therefore, this is kind of like the conversations that we had in the back. Why I'm such a book lover, right? One, because it was a way that I could disassociate from that environment. One, like now I know I was disassociating from that environment. 2 was because I needed to always be on my A game in order for me not to stay behind. Like the most embarrassing thing is you falling back and then you have to stay behind because you just don't know enough. So I always had to be the smartest. I always have to be the ones doing all the work, the catch up, because when you change schools, you have to catch up to whatever it is that it's being taught. And they're not going to go they're not going to slow it down for you. You kind of have to go back to the beginning of the semester, make sure that you do all the work. Sometimes I was coming in right by the end of a semester. So basically I was like, teacher, what do I have to do? So I'm basically doing all the paper, doing all of those. So if you guys are thinking like, Sarah, how come you know so much? It's because I was always doing homework.
You're always cramming.
Wow.
I was always
absorbing
cramming
information.
Exactly.
So,
I was always absorbing information.
Sarah, do you was there ever an instance where you were just so fed up about changing schools so often, or were you just kind of in a infinite place of just acceptance, just constantly taking it chill?
The thing is, like, I always had my brother with me, right? So my brother's 2 years older than me. However, yes, I didn't make a lot of friends because I knew I wasn't going to stay there long enough to make friends, right? So therefore, for me, it was kind of like I was always like, so the church, their thing is like, you go to school, but you don't really integrate into that school because you're basically going to school with a bunch of believers. So they're all evil and you're the only holy child. So basically we kind of were standoffish. Like people would come in, try to be our friends, but we were like, oh yeah. And then people like, oh, you would like to come over to my house? We're like, no, we don't go to people's house. Or,
Right.
in the beginning when we were younger, so let's say when I was like in 5th grade or 4th grade, that was easier to kind of maneuver. But as I was building my identity, I felt kind of like, no, I want to be this person's friend. This person is cool. But I need kind of like, there would be like, my mom would be like, no, you can't be friends with them. They don't come to the church.
Yeah.
Right. So therefore, it's kind of like there were crossroads. Like when I was like in 6th, 7th grade, there was times where I'm like, I was so mad where I had to change schools because now I became friends with Mary, and Mary and I would get along. We're starting to like share experiences. We participate. We were like doing a project together, but I would never see Mary again if my parents moved. So I kind of created kind of that barrier where I only allowed the friendship to go so far. But then I really didn't share what my parents did, what they, what was like my religious background. I would say I'm a Christian. I go to church on Sundays, and then that was that. Like I didn't divulge much of the information, and I used to think like I'm not gonna be here long enough anyway.
Right.
To be your friend. Like we can't, like I remember that there was this little girl in school that this was when I was in 4th grade, where she wanted to share like the little best friend necklace with me.
Oh.
And then I'm like, we can't be best friends because I'm not gonna be in your life and then I was pretty hardcore. Blunt. I was blunt. I like, we can't be best friends. Don't know when I'm gonna see you again. And like she cried. And then I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, there's nothing I can do. I can't accept this. And you should choose a different best friend that's gonna be here like with you. And 2 months later, I was gone. Like, and it was gone where people like, but where's Sarah? Like I didn't even come.
I know. Fast.
And it's like, I didn't even go to the school to say goodbye to my friends. I just ghosted them. It's almost like, when you're like, you in a date and then you like, this date is not going to go away. And just ghost them. I ghosted most of my school friends.
That's interesting. So like school was, you said reading, and basically I would assume school's like your escape from your normal bubble, right? Yep. So you had to keep everybody arm's distance, arm's length. How was your experience in the church then? Since you couldn't have friends with unbelievers, how about other pastors' kids or like members' kids or assistants? How was that viewed?
Yeah. So with pastors' kids, there was, I was allowed to be friends with them, but my mom and my dad always says like, watch out what you say around them. Don't tell them what we discuss in the house. So it's basically kind of like, be friends with them, but watch your back.
You have to like walk on eggshells around them.
It's always, like politics.
It's always
like, oh wow, from very young.
From very young. So from a very young, that's what I heard. I'm not sure if that went on in other households, but I'm pretty sure, because we mistrusted each other. Like, because you could say something that could be misconstrued, and then that other pastor's kid took it the wrong way, went to their parents and said it, and it was kind of not understood. I can give you an example. So like,
we'll be a good example of that.
So a good example. So there was like this outing, which was one of the rare occasions where after Campaign of Israel, the church would say, like, for everyone that did really well, they would pay for a couple of days for you to stay in the hotel, right? And then it was us with probably like about 20 different pastors, and this was in Africa, right? And I was just like, it was actually on a safari, actually. And I was sitting in the car, and then this pastor's daughter, which I was cool with them. I was really cool with them. And this pastor's daughter was, she was in the car, and then she was talking about how she was struggling in school. And the teacher was kind of saying like, oh, you're not doing good enough. You can't read properly, or said something about her. And then I turned around and said, no. I was like, fuck this teacher in my head, right? I didn't have that mindset, but I was kind of like, F this teacher. Like, how dare she says that about you? No, you're capable. You are smart. Blah, blah, blah. Fast track was, I was having this conversation with my little group of, pastor's kid, but there was also a pastor's wife and her husband in the front of the car that was listening to that. She took that, went to like the head bishop and bishop's wife, and basically twisted everything I said, and said, basically what got back was I was bullying the pastor's daughter and saying that she was dumb, that she was stupid, and like calling her names. And then it became my entire pastor's meeting, where my parents got called out for it. And then my dad called me on it. Now my dad called me on it. Like, my dad was like, when we get home, we're going to talk. And that was code word with my dad was going to beat the shit out of me. I was going to beat
basically
him, right? And we were just doing the countdown, right? And, where, this pastor's wife went and created this whole ordeal where even the pastor's daughter didn't even know. My dad's like, you go apologize. And then I had to go, but I didn't even know what I was apologizing for. I was crying. The pastor's daughter didn't know what I was apologizing for. She was like asking her mom. Her mom was completely mad at me, right? Because to her mom was like, oh, you come and bully my child. And then after the daughter explained to her, like, no, that's not what Sara said. Sara was actually defending me. Sarah's like telling me all of these things. And then fast track was, why did the pastor's wife do that? And it wasn't even a pastor's kid that said that. Why did the pastor's wife? Because the pastor's wife felt that my dad shouldn't be in charge of that church, and basically wanted to take my dad out of there so her husband could be in the.
It's just a politic move.
Church.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I got beaten for no reason, right? And then fast forward, when the whole story came to light, like when the pastor's wife ended up confessing that she did that just to get at my parents.
She confessed that?
She confessed it because then I think she felt guilty that my dad beat me, and that, I was being punished for, like, my dad took away, like, but they always take away your computer.
Your toys, it wasn't even a computer. Whatever.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to like do extracurricular activity, which I was already restricted for so many. I'm going to explain that. But the little ones, which was like staying a little bit after school to go to the library or participate in choir, which was like one of the few things my parents allowed me to do, got taken away from me, right? And I guess, and then I think the pastor's wife also, for the daughter, her daughter was like, no, Sara didn't do. My daughter actually explained what happened, and kind of like, to no apology came, right? So my dad never apologized for like beating me or saying anything. He's like, you got beaten so you can learn not to do it. That was basically what he told me.
But you already knew
that is so toxic. I'm sorry.
You didn't do it.
Like, I was like, makes no sense, right? Like, in my head, it's
sense.
like it doesn't take back the hurt, right? I told you I didn't do it and you didn't believe me. You still like, and I'm your daughter, right? So those are kind of like the times where I'm creating kind of like this, bottling up all of these feelings towards my parents, where they're always taking the side of church versus me. And I'm going to discuss a little bit of that. And then the head bishop that kind of called my dad's attention, and his wife basically was like, oh, we're going to do like this party at my house. It's going to be like a dress up, almost like a Halloween kind of thing, because we have costumes. And I still have pictures. I should have brought the pictures, see here. Maybe I'll put
we
some.
We can still insert them.
Maybe we can add some later.
We can add some later, right? So we can add a little bit later. So we had all of this party going on, which we all dressed up. But I kind of felt like this doesn't erase what happened. Like, if you think that I'm going to be like here smiling. So in like, if you even see my pictures, my smile is all fake, because like my mom was like, oh, you're just getting invited so that they can kind of make up for what they did. Don't trust anyone there. Be careful on what you say or do. So it's basically kind of like you don't really know what to trust.
You're on edge all over again.
Yeah. So in terms of like being friends with members' kids or even assistants' kids, it was a little bit different, because like those kids were told by their parents, like, oh, you're basically friends with like a pastor's kid or a bishop's daughter or a bishop's child. They're almost like they're royalty, right? So it's kind of like they treat you like almost like they become like very like, I would say like very clingy. They became very clingy, or like, and it's kind of like, I'm not going to be here a long time in this church anyways for us to be friends like that. And kind of like they want to have kind of like, they want to be invited to like, oh, your dad is having lunch. Can I come? And we're like, no, you can't. Like,
so you started to see like the members and the assistant kids almost, they would become almost like social climbers. Like they wanted to cling on to you because it was cool to be friends with the relative of the pastor, or to get invited to certain things.
Yeah. So it was very like, and then my dad would be like, no, you have to separate those, right? So you can't be friends with this member's child, because you can't call them to come to our house. You can't give them our house number. You can't do this, or you can't do that. You can let them know where you go to school. So it was basically very restrictive as well, where our friendship only began at the door of the church and ended when I came out of the church, right? So
you could only have superficial, kind of interactions and friendships. You were completely isolated.
Yeah. And when my mom always said like, I'm your only friend. Nobody else is your friend. I'm your only friend. Like, don't.
Sounds healthy.
Like, very healthy, right? Extremely healthy. When your mother just tells you, you can only be my friend. I'm your best friend, right? Where you don't like, and you start kind of creating that like, oh, I can't trust anybody. It's almost like living in the streets of the Bronx. Like, you gotta watch your back.
And this is a religious environment, right? And that's
almost like the same.
That's the crazy thing about it, right? It's a religious environment where you shouldn't feel isolated, right? It's all about connection. It's all about like building honestly, community, and it's the opposite.
Yep. Sorry to cut you off, Anthony. No, honestly, like every time Sara talks about some childhood story or something, I feel like it takes me to like Bridgerton. Whoever watches Bridgerton will understand, because it's like you guys are like a royal family, or like, like some higher class family within the hierarchy of the church. So like, people want to get close. People want, like Tony was saying, social climbers.
Yeah, you want to know. You don't know what they do after. What do you do? Where do you go? I like, even having my number was like a privilege. Like, oh, I have the bishop's daughter number. I can call her, and anytime we are friends, right? Yeah, it's true.
And also just the politics of everything. I know I keep mentioning that, but it's just so like, it's so crazy how it runs deep. You would not think that, this would be going on within like the church family, the camaraderie. Like these are, we all left home to serve God together. But instead, like people go after each other. There's so much rivalry. There's so much shadiness in the background. The children, like how you're saying your experience, like this is what the children are experiencing in the background, learning to play this politics game. It's so wild. Like it's so much to unpack.
Yeah. And it was also like between pastors' kids, right? There was also a rivalry when, my my dad's position wasn't, he was never like kind of like the key players. He kind of was like a little bit below it, right? So he wasn't important enough to kind of call shots. My dad was never a shot caller, right? Within the church. But he was basically respected enough to be like, oh, okay, all right, he's an elder, right? So that's
Right.
kind of like my parents kind of set, right? Where he kind of came from like the 70s. He knew like so many people. There are people that my dad knows or that adds me to Facebook to this day that I have no idea who they are. And they're like, oh, I met you when you were like this small. Do you remember me? I'm like you're asking too much. Like, I don't remember. Like, if you were not in my photo album, I do not know who you are. Like, you need to walk me through it. And it's sometimes like, oh, but you remember this church. I remember the church. I'm like, yeah, I remember. They're like, oh, so you should remember me. I'm like, no, don't.
Wow.
I'm 30. I'm 37 years old. I shouldn't remember everyone like that I came across, right? So then with my parents, so my dad was like, he was on shot collar, but he was right below. So with that being said, was if the shot callers kids, right, the ones that took care of countries or large churches, if they liked you, and they would invite you over to their house, which was like almost like a privilege to be invited, right? I wasn't really.
I would not want to be invited, honestly. Is that where you were going with this?
Steph, I didn't like to be invited because there was so many warnings that came with it.
Yes,
right?
girl.
So
no,
many like
things
that could happen. And then like my mom would be like, no, like they're gonna watch what you do, how you eat, how you sleep, what you say, how you play. So always be on high alert, right? So I never wanted to be picked. So basically I used to be like the like no one really picked me, but then eventually people started picking me because I became interesting. Like I was a bookworm, so I was always reading a book. So people like, oh, what you reading? So I'm like, why am I like, I'm doing my best to not be invited, and then people
not
like
be likable,
to not be likable.
But that's how it is, right? When you're not thirsty or desperate for things, it makes other people like, why don't you want to come? Now you got to come.
Yeah.
Like, what's
It's
going
true.
on?
Yeah, but actually, like in those times, like going back, I felt like I was being invited only to be the help. Right. So this pastor's kid that was like almost like the shot callers kid. I like to call them the shot callers. She used to invite like three other pastors' kids as well, including me. But she used to have her little clique where I had to kind of be like initiating into it, but I wasn't up for it. She used to be like, oh, let's sell roses on the streets. I'm like, no, like I'm here to use your pool. If I'm gonna do it, like let me jump in the pool.
Wait, hold up. They had a pool?
Yeah, the shot callers kids, they lived in like a much nicer house. Each one of them had their own rooms. Some of them even had their own bathrooms with like facing the beachfront. They could sometimes walk towards, like if they were in a town that was, and their houses always had a pool. Was basically like sometimes there was a house like with 4 or 5 rooms or even 6 rooms. It was a kind of like very luxurious living. Definitely like huge backyards. So I would never get that because like I was sharing a room with my brother. Like my house was like I was sharing a room with my brother. It was basically a 800 square footage little house, tiny house. And yes, we did have kind of a yard or area, a play area, but it was like shared with the other people that lived there as well, kind of like a common area, right? I never had these things. Like they had dogs, like this shot callers, they had dog, they had they even had people that cooked for them, that cleaned their house, like people that
had staff, they had help,
they had staff. Yep, they had help. They had staff. Like in the mornings when you woke up, there was like breakfast at a table set by them and everything. Like unlimited drinks, unlimited food, unlimited everything. So I'm like, if I'm gonna be here, if I'm gonna get in trouble, I'm gonna get in trouble eating all the good food, right? Eating all these things, right? And you always used to be like on summer breaks, but I'm I'm like, no, I want to swim in your pool. I want to like play in this big yard that you have. I don't want to go out and sell roses for what? You know. But then she would do these things, right? And then if she got caught, you would be the one taking the blame. She would say, "Oh no, it was Sarah's idea."
Oh, so
And I'm like,
she put out like a great idea, get everybody on board, and then if
yeah,
something went wrong, blame whoever was there for the activity, basically.
exactly. And since I was the newest, right? It was
You'd
Sarah's
be easy
idea.
to, yeah.
I'm like, how is
Wow.
this my idea? How is this my idea if I'm sitting here by the pool and y'all? They're like, yeah, exactly, because you stayed here and we went to work for you. I was like, oh, I
we
see.
got,
I see what you did there.
Sinister.
So
exactly
you
right.
can't at school have friends, right? And then now this is the kind of friends that are like supposed to be your core, right? That should understand everything you're going
Your
through.
tribe.
Like they should understand not having mom and dad around. They should understand being isolated. But like now, these are your experiences as a kid. As you start growing older, did you like did things change as you age? Because people might even hear this and be like, oh, but you were kids, you know, what kid doesn't get pushed aside a little bit, right? Or, you know, what kid isn't taken into consideration sometimes. But now as you age, how did things change, or did they stay the same? Did they get worse?
So as you grow older, right? So now you grow up with all of these like red tapes, right? So it doesn't tend to get better. It only gets worse because now you don't really know who to trust. You start mistrusting, and even the kids that did really had good intentions, you would shun them away. Like I talk to, I still talk to some of the pastor kids. Some of them are no longer in the church either, where I had to go back and apologize to them because they were really like came in and trying to be my friend, where I was a complete asshole to them. Right? I used to treat them some sort of way, or so I would keep my arm's distance where they wouldn't be interested in becoming friends with me because I was too mean, right? So I became
That's
kind
like
of
your defense
the mean girl
mechanism.
too. Yeah, it was my defense mechanism, right? And as you get older, no, that just becomes worse because now you are like you don't have any friends. You really, and then it becomes kind of like your duty, right? So now you leave childhood, and childhood is kind of like where you want to play, you want to build those core memories. I didn't build those core memories. Now I'm getting into teenagehood, and now the pressure only keeps piling up because now I'm getting to an age where I can start dating. So now there's auxiliary passes. Oh, you're going to become so now the question changes from like who you want to be when you grow up to be like, are you interested in anybody? Are you when are you going to become an assistant? Like, when are you going to become like, when are you going to start evangelizing more? So then you kind of get like you have to go through all of these milestones as well, where you kind of feel pressured. And then like my when I hit when I hit 12, right, they were like, oh, you're not baptized in the waters yet? Then you need to be, right? Where I didn't even understand the concept of baptism at all. Like I didn't know yet. I only knew that. So my brother was older than I was by 2 years, but my brother was kind of more of like religious than I was. My brother was a very goody two shoes, like the halo on him, where he's like, he did everything right. Like if Jesus came back, and doing any point, there would be no doubt my brother would be like front there and center. He did everything right.
Wow.
He became an assistant when he was 10 years old. He was like,
no, Sarah, but are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, he became
my.
an assistant when he was 10 years old.
So at 10 years old, he's laying hands on people and counseling. And 10, 1-0. And mind you, he was born in this institution. So what kind of life experience does somebody that has only lived inside the church environment, like what is his pool of information and knowledge coming from, right? Like what kind of advice can he give?
He was viewed as kind of like very wise for his
and nothing
years,
against him. Maybe he was, but
no, yeah.
No, but he didn't really. It's kind of to your point, right? What could he bring to someone that is someone going through like on alcoholism, or someone that went through an abusive relationship, or someone that is going through a life crisis, what type of, what did he have to offer, right? To them, or what sort of counseling. But people used to, oh yeah, this is a pastor's kid, he's great. But that's what he was doing. He was going through the motions. He had the calling, right? He's a pastor now. I can't really relate to what went through his head, but didn't feel ready. When I turned 10, that was my biggest fear. Oh, now I'm going to have to become an assistant too. And then I turned 10. Okay, I don't feel the pressure. I can't get away with it. And I got away with it as long as I could. I became an assistant when I was 16, which was like a late bloomer, a very late bloomer.
Which is still really young, like objectively, like 16 is still
objectively,
young to be counseling
but for a
people.
pastor's kid, pastor's kid is like a late bloomer, right? For anyone coming into the church, could be, right? But I still see, like, boys and girls still going through those, like, the preteens, they're being basically like groomed to follow that footsteps, right? On those. So my brother, 10 years old, he got baptized, and then he said he was baptized in the Holy Spirit, and then a pastor raised him as an assistant. And he became an assistant ever since. And he took that title very seriously.
This is, I just came to my mind because you said a pastor raised him. So it wasn't your dad that raised them at 10. No. So let's say, for example, a pastor wanted to raise him at 10 and your dad wanted to object. Would that reflect poorly on him? Was Definitely. That even allowed? Like, did he have a say at all?
Yeah, my dad had a say in it, but my dad was like, "Oh, my son wants to become an assistant. I'm gonna support him full-fledged."
So fast tracked him.
Right. Fast track. Okay. So
it was a proud thing.
Yeah, neither my dad didn't raise me or my brother to become assistants. My dad always said, "I'm not gonna be the one who's gonna put you as an assistant." Even my brother was not put as pastor by my dad either. My dad, that was when my dad drew the line of. My dad was like, I don't want to lie to you, because if you don't have what it takes.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. You just said that. I'm like, is it really because he wanted to make sure he wanted it, or was it because he was worried once again that it would reflect poorly on him if his son didn't turn out well? You know what I'm saying?
There's always
a little bit of that with the pastor's kids.
I don't live in my dad's head, but I can definitely tell you that there was one scenario that I remember where a bishop called my dad to complain about my brother. And my brother now he's a pastor, right? Where he called my dad, this bishop was like, and he's a shot caller. Yeah. So his basic word for word was, so it's a Brazilian terminology for soccer. Your son is one kick away from being like offside. Basically, like, I'm kicking the ball and the ball is not going to hit the goal. He's going to hit the pole and it's going to hit out, right?
He's like, on his last string kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm calling you for you to convince me, right? To convince me that your son is worth investing in. When my dad responds to this bishop was, if you ask me about, and he gives the pastor's name because this was a pastor that he was in charge of taking care of, which was another pastor that had been demoted and being about to be kicked out of the ministry, right? So my dad says, if you ask me about this pastor, I can tell you if he's worth it or not. My son is under your responsibility. So who cannot take care of him is you.
Smart answer.
If he's not working out, basically it's your mentorship.
Exactly. So basically what my dad said is, if my son was under my wing,
then we can have a conversation.
Then you wouldn't hear a phone call from me because he would have been the best pastor there was. But since he's under your tutelage, you're the problem, which the phone call ended with, all right, it's okay. And call ended. My dad's like, I got you. And then my dad proceeded to call my brother saying, what the hell are you doing? Like, I just got a phone call. Almost got chewed out. What are you doing? And then my brother is kind of like, oh, this is what's going. Like my dad's like, get your act together, because I don't want to get a phone call.
Hey
like
guys.
This.
If you've been watching up until now, thank you so much. Or if you've been listening, we really appreciate it. Before we continue, I'd like to ask that if you did like our content, please consider subscribing, following, sharing our content with a friend, a family member, someone that you know needs to hear this. I really hope that it's helping you. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us, or if there's anything at all you'd like to communicate with us regarding your experience in this institution or in another institution where you suffered very similar abuse and similar situations, feel free to contact us. Our email is thedarksideofdevotion@gmail.com. Consider also following us on Instagram and TikTok with the same handle, The Dark Side of Devotion. All right, with that said, let's continue.
So moving from place to place, growing up with all these restrictions, you really don't have a footing in the world. And also, like, we are taught to view the world as like, you step foot and you decide to go to the dark side, straight to hell.
Yeah.
You think about having friends that are not in the same faith as you're contaminated, straight to hell.
Right.
You badmouth the leader or leadership, straight to hell. You talk about things that happen in your house that is not going well to someone, a member in the church, straight to hell. So everything was kind of like, it was like revolved around hell, devil, right? In all of those, right?
Yeah.
I do remember like one point in my life where I believe that I was 5 years old, where I started suffering from having nightmares, like literally nightmare. I was actually seeing things and having nightmares. And this was in a time where, like, there was like a story going around where these dolls were being like being sacrificed or being used to kind of like create bad children for some reason. Like, there was a story going around. And my grandfather used to give me like the dolls, and the most of my toys when I was young came from my grandfather. And I started like seeing the dolls move around, and I used to wake up very like frightened. And it kind of goes back to a question for Steph, right? Steph asked me like before, like in our conversations, like, hey, did Pastor's kid ever get laid their head, like, hands laid on
like
them,
prayer for deliverance.
Like, deliverance? That was probably the only time I remember my parents like laying their hands on me, and they kind of like didn't even believe in what they were praying for. Like, they were just saying like, get out of her, manifest, try to, do an exorcism on me. But I can just remember that time. And like the same way it came, the nightmares went away, right? But no one really talked about why I was having the nightmares to begin with. And I really didn't know myself. All I know is that I couldn't sleep at night. I just couldn't. I was seeing the toys moving. I was having hallucinations, and I couldn't keep my eyes closed. So that probably happened for about a week. And then my parents, after that prayer, my parents never talked about it. Never talked about it.
That's like the spiritual bypassing. It's like, okay, we did our part. That's it. It's over. There's no like, thinking critically about it, getting down to the root, seeing the psychology behind it, the science, maybe.
Yeah. Taking me to a therapist.
To
discuss why is it that I'm having these nightmares? What is like what I'm struggling with? No, nothing. Like they just said it's the devil. We're gonna take the devil out of you and pray. Right. Yep.
Wow.
And then so
I think we gotta mention, you were a teenager, so you mentioned like people asking you about dating and all that. I know we don't got too much left, but that's gonna be some of the tea that we're here for. So your teenage years
my teenage years, that pressure became more prevalent, especially after I became an assistant, because then it was like, oh, so now you became an assistant, so now we know you have the Holy Spirit. What boy are you, what auxiliary pastor are you interested, right? So for me was kind of like, auxiliary pastors that were not pastors' kids were kind of like, oh, I want to date a bishop's daughter, right?
Yeah.
So for them, I was a trophy, right?
Yes.
And then I could choose them if I wanted to, but the best match is between two pastors' kids. So my first boyfriend was a non-pastor, was a non-pastor's kid, right? The dating, like, it was very like, I was in a different mind space. He was in a bit different mind space. He was an auxiliary pastor, but he didn't even last very long, at all. And we dated, I think, for about 8 months, but it was a very, very like it was a very toxic relationship where he had his issues. He was very jealous and whatnot. And then I was like, it was to the point when my mom was like, I don't think you should continue this relationship. My own mom was like, I don't think that this is going to be right. So I kind of made the judgment call and ended things, right? And then, there was another auxiliary pastor that was interested in me, where for me, it's like, because I was never really, so my dad always kept me away from guys. So I couldn't even talk to guys up to when I was like teenager, when I started like dating. So I went from like so my only guy friend was my brother, and I could only have that friend, like I could only be around guys if my brother was with me. So my brother was kind of my escort. So basically me having a conversation with a guy, or it was very, very hard because my dad was like, no, even inside the church and outside the church. I remember vividly the times I got beaten just for talking to a boy. So I remember, so there's two prevalent times that I do remember. The first one was a boy from school. I gave him my number, and was basically, I gave him my number to do schoolwork. But then, I started being interested in talking to him, and we were not talking about anything like relationship wise. I remember the conversation we were talking about soccer, right? My dad comes home from a trip. I think he's about to make a phone call and picks up, and then he hears me on the phone with this guy. He comes, because we lived in a 2-story home. He comes up into the room. He's like, hang up the phone. I tell you not, my dad beat me so bad that I had bruises on my face. Where I went to school, and the school pulled me aside and asked me, do you want to report your parents, like, for abuse? Right? Where I said, no, I don't, because I didn't want anything to happen to them. Right? But I did have a hand bruise on my face. Where my mom tried to but it was really hard to when my dad slapped me in the face, and he left a mark. Right. And then the second
went through that.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of like going through it is really tough. I've forgiven my dad for all of that. He didn't know any better, but we don't talk about it. He doesn't talk about it, right? What all of those things. Does he regret? I don't know. But we have a father-daughter relationship today. Then the second time was, I was outside of school, and teenage years, like when you go to school, like I'm sure Anthony and Steph, when you went to school, how did you guys reach your friends, like boy or girl? Like you give them a hug, you leave, you give them a hug. There's nothing bad about it. My dad came to pick me up that day, right? And so I was like, and he was like a friend with my brothers. And then he's like, oh, Sarah, can I have a hug? Me kind of like just being me, like, oh yeah, sure. I hugged him. My dad drives by, and the look on my dad's face tells it all. Like, I'm going to be beaten up, right, for this. So my dad is like, oh, this is what you come to school for. This is what you do. I get a beating for that. So for me, in my head is boys are bad.
Right.
Stay completely away, because just getting within like 50 feet of them, it will earn you a beating, right? Where my brother was allowed to speak to girls, was allowed to have conversation with girls, but I wasn't allowed to have kind of like opposite sex friendship, right? No, because guys,
Wow.
all the guys want is to get to your pants, blah blah blah. The spiel my dad used to make, right? You know, and for me, it's like, okay. And then fast track is, so when I came to the United States, my dad was like, oh, now you don't have your brother to look after you, right? So if I catch you doing anything wrong from school, my dad said, I will go to jail, but you're going to get a beating.
Wow.
So
That's scary.
my dad knew that is illegal. Like, corporal punishment where you leave a mark is illegal, but he was going to do it anyway. So I was always left with that in my head. So in my head was, I don't want my dad to go to jail, so I'm not going to do anything, right? So therefore, those are kind of the things. So as I, started dating, so then when there was like this auxiliary pastor that was interested in me, where he kind of said like, I'm interested in you. He was just starting as an auxiliary, and then he kind of had the conversation, and there was kind of like, it wasn't a language barrier, but his accent was more like, was Caribbean. So I was still getting used to the Caribbean accent, where I'm like having the conversation with him, and I didn't quite understand what he was saying. He's like, I like you. And then I just responded, oh, I like you too. Right. But for me, the like was, I like you, like just normally liking.
Yeah,
I don't
you're a
like you
decent
in
guy. Yeah, you're a
yeah, you
decent
like,
guy.
we can continue this conversation because you're a nice guy, right? It wasn't like the like in a relationship. But then he took that and he kind of went to my dad like, oh, I like your daughter, I want to date your daughter. And my dad shut it down like, oh, you still just starting, blah blah blah. But fast track, my dad later, when he was like kind of more experienced auxiliary, my dad wanted me to date him. And then I was like, no, that's not for me, right? And I kind of like, no. It's like, I was never interested in him, right? But that was kind of those, right? And then I did have another relationship afterwards, which was with another bishop's son. And that was kind of also kind of like, it was very weird too, because like, I dated him, he dumped me where he said I wasn't spiritual enough, then dated another pastor's daughter, then that didn't work out, ended with her, and then he asked me to date him again. So it's kind of like, and
What?
I was kind of like, yeah, and I was very naive. Where I was like, oh yeah, so now he's coming back to me because now he probably thinks that I'm spiritual enough, right? So that's kind of like, like the psychology, like
You want to
Right,
prove yourself,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
like,
prove myself. And I was
yeah.
very like, and I was in a very fragile state, mind state as well, where people would talk to me in a loud tone or something, and I would start bursting into tears. I know now, like now I know that was like kind of depression and kind of different other issues, like mental issues, but mostly depression, where I was going through. So it's kind of like just where if I'm the Sarah, if I am the 37-year-old Sarah today looking at 19-year-old Sarah, I'll be like, girl, what you doing? Like, no. Like a guy dumps you, you're not taking him back. What is wrong with you? Like, no. Like no, get the hell out of here, right? So therefore it's like, those are kind of the mental, like how broken mentally I was in there.
And this is
where
a bishop's daughter, right? Then they put on, they use you as an example
pedestal
for so many other youths, right? Like look at these perfect people, and look at the reality though. And this is why it's the dark side of devotion, because these are the things that don't get talked about. But it's like when people leave the church, like think about it. What would it take for a bishop's daughter who was born in the institution, whose brother's a pastor, whose her whole family lineage is in this place, to leave? It's not an easy choice. There has to be something that makes you make that decision. And it's not just somebody, went buck wild and went to the world, and no.
Or the devil.
There are very real reasons why these things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I was very scared to leave, because leaving for me meant I would have to leave my entire family behind.
All you've ever known.
everything I
Everything.
would have known, like my entire identity, right?
Mhm.
And for me it was kind of like a wake-up call where, where I kind of I was dwelling between, like, you know I felt a duty. So one thing is like in there is like you feel a sense of duty, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to become a pastor's wife because my parents are bishops and and bishop's wife, and that is the only future I have, right? And
Right.
me not becoming a pastor's wife means it's going to be shameful for my dad. My dad won't be able to climb the ladder of success. That is how
Right.
that is the kind of the duty that gets imposed on you
You
to
didn't want to be a
become.
blemish in his ministry, right? Like
Exactly, because having a failed
nothing to
child
hold
means
against him.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
also it goes like, not to be, raging feminist right now or anything, but it shows again like the patriarchal system, the fundamentalism that exists
Mm-hmm.
within the church and just religion in general, because like you're a pawn basically in this
Mm-hmm.
game.
Yeah.
Like my daughter has to remain pure. All the corporal punishment you were talking about just for like talking with a boy from school, for me, like I get that your dad was trying to protect you, maybe teach you that boys just want to get in your pants, but also I kind of feel like it would bring so much shame to him if like everyone found out that his daughter had like been with a boy and all this stuff, because then in the future how can he marry you off to another like well-to-do bishop's son or something like that,
Exactly.
like that.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I agree with that, right, Steph? So going to like, so I had two failed relationships, meaning wasn't even married. It was just dating,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you were supposed to get to know. But I was already marked as, oh, you dated two guys already.
Mm.
You were already impure.
Exactly.
Right? Where there was a particular pastor's wife that came up to me like, oh, so you just got dumped by this last boyfriend of yours. Who's gonna want you now? Right? So therefore for me was like always an outcast. So this is how I turned to books to kind of create my own distort reality. Like I had like I read books to be like, I want to be this character because I want to have an out of body experience, and I lived through the characters that I read. So I used to hate when books from the church were being pushed onto me, because those books that, like, this is what I hear every single day. I want to read like what
Right.
was outside. It was not even my core interest. So at home it was like almost like you have to read your Bible every single day. So I had to cite a passage from the Bible. So the Bible, I know it from cover to cover, like that, because that was kind of like, oh no, if you haven't read a chapter or a verse, if you then you're falling out. Now you are one step away from being in the world. That
Right.
is not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So for me it was like, so my dad was a little bit more strict, where he's like, oh, Sarah's always reading secular books, why you're allowing to do that. My mom was a little bit, no, she should read and whatnot. But my dad is like, no, if you're going to read a secular book, you have to read a church book. So I kind of had to be like, oh no, so Dad, I'm reading this book,
Balance.
but look, I already read this one. I already read the entire newspaper of the church with a whole bunch of grammar errors and whatnot.
Exactly. That's
um
true.
so I got out of the library a book on zodiac, because I really didn't know what zodiac was, right? So I wanted to learn. So I'm always like learning. So I got a book out on zodiac to learn about signs and whatnot. My dad saw that one and I got beaten.
Ugh.
I got beaten. And then the other, so secular, um, you know, songs as well. So um I remember that, like, I used to have a habit when like internet was just coming out, because I wanted to learn the lyrics of a song. I used to
Mm-hmm.
print out the lyrics of a song. At that time was Destiny's Child. So I remember even
Yes.
why I got beaten up for it. So Destiny's Child was a up and coming like girl group, and I think the song was Bills. Can you pay my bills? Can you pay my telephone bills?
Yeah.
Um, and my dad, saw the lyrics and he didn't quite like it. I got beaten for that.
Ah, no.
Yeah.
Oh Oh my
And
god.
not only beaten, I was ordered to also transcribe the Psalm 150, which is the longest psalm in the Bible, like the longest chapter in the
Are
Bible.
you
I think that
serious?
I had to write it out.
Man.
Oh my gosh, Sarah.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
it's like was kind of hypocritical of my dad, because my dad was really into music. So I grew up a lot listening to like Bee Gees, Diana Ross, all of this, like, the disco era.
like
My dad
legends,
kind
the
of,
classics.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know almost every single song from that era, because my dad used to buy the CDs and collect the CDs. So that's all I listened to in the car. And you're basically like beating me for listening to bills, where a woman is
Bills.
saying, you got to pay my bills. Like, what?
Makes no sense.
Makes no sense, right? So those are kind of like the things growing up in there, right? And then this kind of summarizes like how my childhood and how it came to be. How I actually left the church, right? So my parents moved to Canada. This was like in 2009 or 8 or 9, something like that. And the church says, well, it wasn't the church who said it. It was the bishop that was in charge here in New York told my dad, your daughter cannot come with, right? Because every single time the bishops move, they have to do immigration papers and whatnot. But I was already working in the studio, because that's where Anthony, we kind of like cross paths, right? I
Yeah,
was
the TV
working
studio.
I was working in the studio at that time, and I was basically a key player in the studio, where I was recording, editing, post production, doing like a 6-man job, right, by myself.
I was just gonna say, that's how it is.
We're gonna discuss that, right?
Oh yeah.
So they couldn't replace me fast enough. So like, Sarah cannot go, and my dad kind of agreed to that, right? My mom was in shambles, where my mom, I don't think she even knows I saw this, but my mom was crying. And
Really?
because she was like, I'm leaving my daughter, like, I don't know how these people are gonna treat her and whatnot. It was with the
She
first
was
time
right.
that we were apart, right? I can definitely tell you my mom was right, because those were like the worst moments in my life, and it kind of what gave me the strength to say, no, I cannot live my life like this, where, I was treated worse than anyone could be treated. I was talked down to, I was put aside. So if I already felt lonely having my family with me, I felt like I was by myself. Like, no one was there for me. Like, no one had my back. And then what made it worse was that if anything happened to me here, or I did something, my dad would get a twisted story, so that, because they knew that if my dad said something to me, that would kind of bring me back, right? Reel me in. Because I was very challenging. Like, I was like, you can talk to me any type of way, but I'm only gonna allow you to talk to me some type of way for so long, where I'm gonna start like, pushing back. And when I started doing those pushback, my dad used to hear it, a twisted story. And my dad never took my side. He always took the side of whoever is telling the story, right? And that was it. Like, I can definitely go into detail, because that is it was where my sexuality came into, like, into play. My they accused me of being a lesbian to my dad, and it was like the most like disgraceful thing that you could ever do, where I started hating my parents. Like, I already, like, the relationship with my parents were like kind of, up and down.
It was already
But
strained, right?
it
Yeah.
was already strained. It was already like, so I hate to say this, but now, like, being like knowledgeable in psychology, I really didn't learn how to love my parents. I learned to fear them, especially my dad. My dad, he didn't look to be loved. He looked to be feared, which is, it's a pretty harsh thing for a child to say about her parent, but that is how Macedo runs the UCKG.
I was gonna say, that's how he was taught.
Want to be loved. he doesn't want to be loved. He wants to be feared. And he passed on that teaching to his pastors. So his pastors, they don't want to be loved by anybody. They want to be feared. They want to be, and fear to my dad is more respect, but
it's
for
authority,
me it's like,
right?
It's authority. It's like, this is how she shows that she loves me. But it's not really, because like I didn't trust telling my dad anything. I told my mom more of the things that I did, but my dad really didn't know a lot. Like by the time my dad found out, it was like months later, and my dad used to feel like, oh, but you didn't come to me, you didn't tell me this, because I didn't trust you to tell you something, because I didn't see you as a dad. I saw you as kind of an authoritative figure that kind of like, if you snapped, I would be beaten. Like, for any reason, right? So therefore, I hate saying that, but I can definitely say that, and I think it's the first time that has come out of my mouth, actually, on this podcast.
Thank you for sharing, Sarah.
Yeah. So
I know this is hard.
Yeah. So I only learned to love my parents after I left, because I had to accept them for their flaws, for the mistakes, that realize that they are in that situation, because that's also, they came in very young. They came in their formative years, and that's what they were taught, right? But what they present, like, I didn't feel like I was unloved. That's one thing, right? From my parents, I didn't feel like I was unloved. What I did feel like, my parents, they valued church over anything. So church came before anything. So if my dad was like, oh, Dad, I'm going to have a play in the school that I'm going to participate, can you be in attendance? Matter. If it was 6 p.m., there's a meeting at 7, I will not go, right? If there was like a special thing like in my life, church always came above it. If my birthday fell on a Sunday, forget about it. There will be no celebration. Right? And those are kind of the things. So did I feel neglected? Many times. Did I feel unloved? Never. Did I feel neglected at times? Yes, because those are like your children. So a child doesn't care who their parents are. Their parents can be kings and queens of a country, right? What they want is their mom and dad. I never had my mom and dad in my formative years. So like when my parents were in Brazil, my parents were so focused on climbing the ladder of success, where my mom, who used to work in the headquarters in the office with like the money coming in or the money coming out, where so I was up to the age of 9, I was raised by a babysitter. She used to be like the one that was there every single day, where some people used to think that she was our mother, my brother, because she used to pick up from school. She used to drop us off. My mom only used to show up to register us, but then she would never appear again. She would be the one preparing our meals, taking care of us, right? But my parents in Brazil, I only saw my dad one time a week, which was on a Saturday, laying down on the couch sleeping, because he was just too tired to be there, just be at home. That was the only time that he had off, because my dad used to leave at 4 a.m. and only return at 1 a.m.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's like such bad conditions.
I've lived that life. That's how it is daily. And any cracks of you seeming to be tired is seen as weakness, and they tell you got to step it up and work harder.
Yeah, because my dad used to work in the church, and then there was the radio program, then there was the TV program. So his day used to start at 4 a.m. and end at 1 a.m. So he only used to sleep for a couple of hours, or come home, shower, and he was leaving. And I used to know that my dad used to come in, because I used to hear like him coming through the door. And then I knew it was 4 a.m. because he was already leaving. So there was very rare times during the week where I saw my dad. For my mom, my mom used to be home probably twice a week. But then every other day she used to leave a little bit later. So in Brazil, the school hours are a little bit different, right? Here in the US, it starts like at 7 a.m. and ends at 2. In Brazil, you have block 1 and block 2. So you have the day schooling and the afternoon schooling. So my brother used to go to school in the mornings and I used to go in the afternoons. So my mom used to leave early in the morning, right? So my brother saw my mom. I was still sleeping. And then I used to go to the afternoon class sessions, right? In the afternoon, I didn't see my mom and I only came back and my mom was still not home. My mom used to come back home with my dad like around 1 a.m.
Wow. That is insane. I cannot imagine spending such little time with my kids. And they barely got any time together too, I'm sure. So how do you raise a family in this environment and in these conditions?
You don't.
And then the
I
crazy
don't.
thing
You're
is,
right.
like, and then the leadership, like and this is what bothers me, right? Because this is the reality for most pastors and bishops' kid, right?
Yep.
They're like pretty much they go through most of
And
the
you
time
also
not having their
like
parents around.
exactly. And I think the other thing that people don't really talk about is with so much like stories about, sexual abuse or any type of abuse, you leaving your child with a total stranger just because they are an assistant in your church doesn't really say
No background check.
Does
that.
not
Yeah, it
mean
doesn't do a
shit.
background check. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. It could be like so here's the other kicker of my growing up. This lady that took care of me, she passed away a few years ago, right? From health, and I'm gonna go through that because she became a pastor's wife. So that's gonna be
Okay.
an episode. So she she was allowed um to beat us. She could
Ah,
corporally punish
oh my
us,
gosh.
and I've gotten beaten by her a couple of times growing up.
Wow,
Yep.
that's so insane.
Right.
And the thing is, like, the way they present it too, because the leadership, they boast so hard about, I can bless your family because my family's blessed.
That
But
right
here
there.
is what's going on behind the scenes. And that's what bothers me because,
Yeah.
if you painted the picture the way it really is, I could respect you more. But that, like, putting up that mask
It's
for
true.
everybody to see, and then while the truth is so disgusting, and
Yep.
then you call yourself, men or women of God,
That's a
that's
great point.
unacceptable.
Yeah, I
It's just
never saw it
unacceptable.
from that perspective, right? So it's funny because now you're bringing me back to memory lane, right? So my dad used to be like, my family's gonna come here to the altar and we're gonna bless your family, right? The same happiness I have in my family, I'm gonna give it to you, right? And then
Mhm.
we
Yeah.
are playing that part, standing there in front of the people, but they were not really present parents. That
Exactly.
was only for show, like, and then painting that picture. That's a great point, Anthony. I never
It's
thought it from that perspective
once again the dark
either.
side.
The dark
Yep.
side of the right. So that is it, guys. I think any
Yeah.
final thoughts,
Well, I'm
any
sorry you
additional
went
things?
through all that, first off, and
Me
thank you for
too.
sharing.
No
I think
problem.
it's important I think you speak for a lot of pastors and bishops' kid whose story was never told, that they're just blacklisted,
Exactly.
right? They looked at the bad guy.
Yeah.
Oh, he left the church. He's not spiritual, or she's not spiritual. But look at all the things that happened before they made that decision. Look at
Yeah.
why they started losing respect for what the men and women of God would say. It's because of things like this.
Yeah. And I think I kind of understand a lot. I now, like, so when these pastor kids started rebelling, I was kind of on that side of like, oh, they're not good. They are like they're being used by the devil. But when
Yeah.
I had to wear the shoes and I had that, I was like, no. Because when you kind of like, I'm not sure if you guys went through it, but when I left the church, it kind of, I had to assimilate, right? Because it was a whole new world for me, right? I had to basically reintegrate. I had to actually enter society because I had never been in society.
I was
That's a
gonna
good point.
say
Yeah.
you had to
It's not a-
integrate. We
I had to-
reintegrated.
Yeah, I had to integrate
Mhm.
into society where I had to kind of like, I used to call, like, I remember on my first job, I used to call everyone Sir, Mr., Mrs. And people like,
Because you were taught that. Yep.
what are you talking about? Like, my name is so and so. And I'm like, and it was foreign to me, right? I never used to look people in the eye, never used to make eye contact either. If a boss called me to the office, I was already like with that trigger warning, like, oh, I'm gonna get called out for, like, I'm gonna get, and I wasn't even thinking about
anticipating the worst.
Same.
We already, like, I did something wrong, and it was actually to praise my work, was actually to, and I always had to be like on eggshells. And then I kind of like little by little, I started kind of like being like a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more, being talkative. And then when people like, when my coworkers used to invite me to happy hour, I'm like, no, I can't. Like, I still saw them kind of as unbelievers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, at one point, something clicked to me, right? Clicked, like, it was like almost like over. It was, I wouldn't say overnight, but it was a click, right? Where where in my head, I kind of like had to go back to like what I was taught versus what I was living, right? And I said, I have never been treated so well by unbelievers that like in the church, I never got this type of treatment at all.
Yeah, so like the unbelievers were treating you in ways that even believers never did, basically, right? Like,
exactly. I never had that type of like,
I've heard that a lot from people who left.
I mean, I think our experience is similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were trained to look at the world as bad guys, and then when we got in there, we were like, these guys are cool. You guys are actually acting like the bad guys,
assholes.
Like, like it's crazy.
Yep. And then it's kind of like, and then I remember that like people used to call my dad like, oh, and where's Sara working? Where, and then my dad used to respond like, well, I don't get any phone calls from Sarah's boss, so she's doing good.
Good answer.
I like that.
Right? Where, because like they were practically my boss calling my dad to be like saying some type of, no, she's doing fine, she's doing great, right? So kind of to say like, no, I'm glad she left because you guys were toxic, right? So those are kind of like the things, like just summarize on those. And I think that this is kind of like where we kind of going to leave off on episode 2.
Yes, thank you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe button to support us if this is something that resonated with you. Share it, follow us on our social medias, The Dark Side of Devotion. Until next time, guys, thank you.
Peace.